Okay, so hello and welcome to episode number 5 of Colours of COVID, the Alchemy Arts series set up in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on mental health. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Mark Heads, UK production manager at Create Productions and co-founder of the hugely successful Baffled podcast. Mark, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be on the other side of a podcast, not one where I'm hosting or having to worry about production. Just sit back and chat. I enjoy it. It's nice.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as you know, this is something new for us. So I'm looking forward to learning some tips from you as well, really.
I'll guide you through it. It'll be easy. We'll get through it together. It'll be all right.
Cheers. Now, that's good to know. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a closer look at the rise of podcasts, specifically during lockdown. There's been close to a 50% rise in the number of podcasts worldwide since June 2018. There are now over 1 million different series and 30 million episodes available to listen to, stream and download, which really highlights just how many people are trying to get involved with such a popular area of the media industry. So we're going to be covering a few topics. So what makes a podcast stand out, and how can you be creative in order to make your podcast appeal to a wide audience? What are the key pieces of advice needed to create a great podcast? And does something like lockdown help or hinder the creative process? Firstly, Mark, where did the idea for the podcast come from? Was it something that you planned well in advance of lockdown, or did the period of isolation speed up your decision to make a podcast?
With Baffled, the idea had been there for a little while. So me, Dan and Connor, who co-host it with me, we've known each other I've known Dan for about 7 years now. I've known Connor for maybe 2 or 3. And we've always kind of had that idea of doing something. And actually I was the one who was most resistant to it. So my happy place is being the person behind the microphone who never has to speak, just producing, just making great content. And, Baffled's one of about kind of 15, 20 podcasts that I work on or look after in general. And I've always been very resistant to be on mic, because I used to do it in my uni days, but I haven't done it since then. And it's not, in my mind, it's like, presenting's not my job. So I was almost the one that had to be persuaded most into Baffled. And we'd had an idea, we'd had a meeting pre-lockdown, and it was a bit slow to get going. And then lockdown happened. And in a way, lockdown for us helped us just say, right, we now have that time to really focus on new projects, to say, what are we launching? How do we launch it? Let's just do it. And I think in a weird way, lockdown helped us creatively to be able to focus on these new things. And obviously, as you said, Baffled launched during lockdown. We did a pilot episode during lockdown. We did the first 22 episodes, I think, of it, or 21 episodes of it, never being in the same room. So, it was lucky that we knew each other so well, because it wasn't until episode 22 that we actually sat in this studio that I'm in now and could see each other's faces while we were doing it. So it was certainly a challenge doing it during lockdown, but I think in a weird way it helped.
Yeah. So, Mark, why were you so resistant to doing it? I mean, I know you said that you're not a presenter and things like that, but I suppose it would have been. I would have probably been excited about it, but you said you were resistant.
So it was my boss, John, who had the idea of kind of bringing us together. We always work on the basis of, and it's a very well-known thing in TV and in radio, that you need 3 different characters. You need a smart aleck, a lovable rogue, and an innocent fool. And John always used to say, whenever the 3 of us were in the office, because we worked together on other projects and different pieces, he always used to say, you 3 of those characters, you 3 should do something. And it was probably about 12 to 18 months that I was resistant to it, going, no, I'm not doing a podcast. I'm happy just being, producer on a bunch of podcasts. And I think part of it was I knew what I did well, and I knew presenting was something I could do, but I didn't want to do something and do it badly. So it did take quite a bit of persuading to get me into it, I'll admit. But John was like, nope, you're doing it. I'm going to make you do it. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll give it a go. I'll do a pilot and I'll give it a go. And then, it's just kind of skyrocketed from there, really.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I bet you're glad that you kind of went through with it. really. I mean, tell us a little bit more about the podcast and some of the, the content that you kind of come up with, because it seems to be received really well, both here and over in the USA as well.
Yeah, and I think that's that's almost something that surprised us. That we thought we're three British boys and just friends, just chatting, random stuff, and somehow it's exploded in America, which has been really nice for us. But the podcast itself, so it's called Baffled, with kind of the subtitle of "Amazing Facts That Are Complete Nonsense." And at its heart, it's a fact-based podcast. So each of us bring 3 facts to the table every week, so 9 facts in total in a podcast. But they're not just your normal type of facts. They're facts that are completely ridiculous, that you're just like, why is that a thing? Or how did you find this? Or are you actually talking the truth right now? But all of them are true. All of them are absolutely true. And yeah, it's just a little bit of fun. We class ourselves as a comedy podcast rather than an intellectual podcast. If people are coming to us for intellect, then they are very mistaken. You're going to learn stuff as you go, but it is a comedy podcast at its heart. It's just as much about the interaction between the 3 of us and the banter between the 3 of us as it is about the facts. We had one review on the American Apple Store, I think it was, that said, 3 stars. I can get through this podcast in 15 minutes just for the facts, not for the banter. And it's like, yeah, fine. If you want to come just for the facts, you will get through it in 15 minutes. But that's not what it's designed for. It's designed to be a funny podcast that you enjoy, that you laugh with. And I mean, we've had completely ridiculous things that have exploded out of it that we never thought it would. Connor's IBS gets spoken about a lot more than I don't think any of us ever imagined that IBS would be a recurring theme on the podcast. And yet somehow Connor's IBS is mentioned almost every week, to the point that we have badges that now celebrate Connor's IBS. So it's kind of, things explode in ways that you never expect, but you just kind of have to roll with it and just play along with however it was. When we launched the podcast, we knew at the core and at the heart what it was going to be, but we never knew that 20 episodes down the line we'd have recurring jokes, we'd have so much interaction that we'd be giving out badges, and you just kind of have to roll with it as you go and almost develop and be dynamic to what your listeners want and what your listeners are interacting with. Yeah,
definitely. And it kind of sounds as though you've kind of developed a community of listeners now as well, and that's probably the biggest thing for us to kind of learn from, about how you kind of built that community. Mark, just listening to you there as well, over the last few months there's been a tense and worrying time for people across the country. Do you think podcasts like yours have helped people kind of switch off from their troubles and just enjoy some lighthearted, entertainment, for an hour of the day? Because especially when you were talking about, that it's about facts, but it's also about keeping it lighthearted and fun. I just wanted to kind of explore that a little bit.
Yeah, it's very much, people go to podcasts to escape, and especially now with everything going on in the world, having those 30-40 minutes just to escape what is going on is a big thing. And I think we don't necessarily consciously make an effort of it to not mention it on the podcast, but there's very, very few mentions of, COVID and the real world almost in our podcasts. It's a case of, no, let's just focus on the facts. Let's just do that. And, there was another podcast we launched during lockdown called Look on the Bright Side, which was very much a conscious, let's find some good news stories in the world and just talk to people about, the good stuff that's going on, because we knew people wanted that escapism. And I think, a lot of podcasts are doing that now, that people have always listened to podcasts at moments that they want to focus on that and not what they're doing. That's why people will listen to them on their commute. That's why people will listen to them at the gym. Because if you listen to it at the gym, you're not thinking about the 20 minutes you're doing on the treadmill, or you're not thinking about that next set of reps that you've got to do. You're laughing about Connor going to the loo 4 times a day and, having a painful bumhole. That's the kind of thing you're thinking about, rather than, I can't believe I've got to do another set of 10. So, and that's exactly the same with COVID, that if you can give yourself that escape for 40 minutes, you're not worrying about everything that's going on. You're not worrying about the fact that, COVID's out there, that you're working from home, that you can't see your mum and dad, that you can't do this, you can't, it's just a sense of somewhere else. It's a sense of a happy place that you can just put yourself into.
Yeah, Mark, I wanted to kind of just pick up on that as well. With how was it for you? I mean, lockdown. I know it seems alien now, but it's like it's almost like the new normal that we've got used to. But how was it for you when lockdown first happened? You know.
I mean, we were lucky as a company that because my company Create, we obviously do podcasts, but we also do events and video, and we're used to working remotely. So
Yeah.
for us as a company, we were able to very quickly change what we were doing almost overnight. That all of us sat in our, in our bedrooms and our kitchens and our lounges, wherever we happened to be working from, we could still connect. We could still get on video calls. We knew how to, remote into the office. We knew how to access all the files we needed. We knew how to communicate with a team when we weren't there. So as a company, we were very quick to react. And I think we did that very well. Whereas a lot of companies that aren't used to that probably struggled a bit more.
Yeah.
But personally, I started hating the four walls of my flat. I was lucky that I had a big enough space that I could have my bedroom, I had an office room, and I had my lounge. So I had different areas that I could work in, and different areas I could relax in, and different areas I could sleep in, rather than doing everything in one room. I think for a lot of people, especially in London, where you do tend to get small flats, if you're working in the room you're relaxing, you never really relax because you're only a meter away from your laptop. If you're working in the same room that you sleep in, you never really switch off when you go to bed. If you can have those different rooms, you kind of get away with it a little bit more. So I was lucky in that aspect. I lived with my girlfriend, which makes things a lot easier. She's a intensive care nurse, so she was absolutely going through everything.
Oh wow!
That was her on the front line. And I think in a weird way that almost made me feel better, because I was like, if she can do that, if she can go and fight COVID on the front line every day, covered head to toe in the hottest PPE in the world, then you know what, I can sit in my bedroom and make a couple of podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I kind of echo those sentiments. We're from a quite a large Asian family, and I just came to the office more or less every day during lockdown because it was it was a chance to self-isolate in that creative environment, but it allowed us to kind of, as an organization, to slow down as well, and just kind of reflect on how we would do things differently. So I kind of really echo those kind of feelings. But just linking on to that, Mark, I wanted to ask a little bit about how has the production of the podcast been for you? Has it helped to establish a sense of normality in your life with all that chaotic stuff going on? Did it actually help producing or developing the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of weeks was all a bit mad, because I said Baffled's kind of one of about 15 podcasts that we as a company sort of look after. And my role is to sort of oversee most of them. So I was doing a lot more edit work than I normally do. So I had to kind of adjust to that. And I was, we were having to figure out new ways of doing all of our podcasts. And for some podcasts, it worked brilliantly, that we went, okay, it's fine. We're just going to record everything from people's homes. And actually that means that we've got more time with them and it's easier. For other podcasts, they almost were like very reluctant to do that, to change and to say, well, no, I like being able to be there with my guests. I like being able to have that interaction with them and be able to see them and all of this. So so the first couple of weeks was a bit mad as we almost worked through all of that and figured out how all of that was going to work. But yeah, you do get a bit more time to think about things creatively. I'm lucky that my job is very podcast focused. And it's, and it's moved that way with the growth of podcasts. Whereas I used to work across events and video, I'm a lot more on podcasts now because we know that's where the big growth is. So it makes sense to focus on that. And I think almost lockdown allowed us to do that even more, that because the producers that we normally have working on events, they had no events to work on, were able to focus on different areas. So my colleague Sarah, for example, she's an absolute whiz when it comes to event production. And suddenly overnight, she became a podcast producer. And, and she was able, because she's got the skills, she's able to adapt to that. But we suddenly were like, right, here's a couple of projects. Can you just work on, you don't need to record them and edit them. We'll do that because we've got the, the specialist skills in that. But you're a brilliant producer. Can you go and figure out, the one I mentioned earlier, look on the bright side? Can you go and find some great stories for that and get those all set up? And I almost had it easier that I could keep the same job I had. It was people like Sarah within the business who suddenly had to change overnight. and suddenly had to say, oh, okay, I'm now a podcast producer. Okay, let's focus on that and do that and do that. And obviously your core skills are the same, but it is different. So, but then on the flip side of that, having the extra staff and having the extra time from them to do that allowed us to launch more stuff. So lockdown, therefore, kind of podcast wise anyway, helped creatively us push out a lot more content, figure out new stuff. I mean, we launched, I reckon, maybe 5 or 6 new podcasts during lockdown. Wow. And, Baffled was one of those. A couple of interview ones, so Music in My Life with a singer called Laura Wright, Look on the Bright Side. As I said, there was a bunch of different podcasts we launched during that time because we had the time to focus on that and be able to just put all our energy into podcasting.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a good medium because people had a lot more time, to listen as well, really, just to kind of unwind and kind of focus in on. And what I found is a lot of people, I found ways to try and be creative during lockdown. The last few months, in a sense, basically what you did is similar to what you guys have done by creating that podcast from scratch, and then managed to develop like a core listening audience base. With a lot of new starters within the creative industries, it can be difficult to build something from scratch and make it successful in such a short period of time. What has been the most challenging aspect of this new adventure for you guys?
Ooh, most challenging. I think it's a good question. I think the most.
See, we got you there. We thought, we'll challenge you with some kind of yeah.
I don't think there's necessarily been a challenging part to it. I think, for us, it's come quite naturally to be able to build, we had the rapport before, so we didn't necessarily need to worry about that. Tech-wise, we were all set up to record from home, so we all had decent audio setups at home. So Dan and Connor present on other radio stations, so they were set up tech-wise to do that as well. So that was that was easy enough, and the rapport was easy enough. I think
Matt, what I was probably kind of getting at is that people who are novices to this, but they've got kind of an ambition to go into podcasting.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that they would probably benefit from knowing about setting something like this up and then looking at growing their audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with podcasts, and this is what I say to every podcast we work with, is you can't expect instant results. Podcasts are slow growers. It will take a bit of time to get there. With Baffled, we're lucky that we've grown quite quickly. And we did that off the back of Apple picking us up for promotion in the UK and the US, and having that promotion helps. Without that, spreading the word is the hardest bit of it. And I think for a lot of people, it's that persevering through those initial stages and not getting disheartened by how many listeners they're getting. You're not necessarily going to go straight in, especially if you're not a big name, if you're not a, Vogue Williams, who's just launched her new podcast, Vogue and Spencer, that went straight into #1 without an episode even being launched, a trailer. Those two are so big and they have such a huge following that people are going to listen regardless. So, for them, they're going to get big straight away. For most people who have, a couple of hundred followers on Instagram rather than a couple of 100,000 followers, it's going to take time to grow. It's going to take time to get there. It's the persevering through those first few months where your numbers are low. We obviously had a small base to work off. As I said, I'm a producer. I don't have a lot of Instagram followers because I'm not a public face. Dan's got a few more than me from his radio stuff. Connor's got more again. So we had some to work off, but it was a small base compared to a lot of the talent that we work with. It's then looking at other ways you can get there. Can you get in contact with Apple to try and get some promo? Can you try and spread the word by using social teasers on Twitter and Instagram that people are going to pick up and share? Can you bombard every single family member and friend you've ever met to listen and give you a 5-star rating? It's those sort of things. That's the real challenge, I think, for podcasts, is getting that initial traction, but also not getting downhearted when you don't. You can create the best content in the world. Content is still king in podcasts, but if you're not known about, you're not going to get anywhere. If you're not known about, it's harder to get somewhere, I should say, rather than you're not going to. But you know, there are podcasts that are started by small people which blow up. So just keep going, keep creating great content, and remember that should be at the heart of it. Content is king. Content should always be the bit that you focus on. Don't try and do something because you think it's going to make you popular. Do something because it sounds good, and do something because people were going to want to keep coming back to how it sounds in that content before you start trying to, you know, walk before you can run.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my kind of lead on to my final question with a lot of people who are still adjusting to the new normal, and as restrictions start to be eased. Well, I mean, we talk about it being eased, but you know, even just you know, this week they're talking about you know, more than 6 people gathering together is going to be kind of illegal, and people can be fines and everything like that. And I wanted to, you know, you kind of mentioned it already about your experiences and what advice you would give. And you kind of covered a lot of that advice about people being creative in their everyday life. But I mean, one of the things I was curious about is that, did you find it easier at the start of lockdown when you were developing the podcast, being away from the other guys, or is it better being in the studio with each other?
We were obviously lucky that we had the rapport going into it, and that we knew each other well. But actually, I think, yeah, in a weird way, being in different rooms helped. Because, you know, not that anything has changed now we've come back into the studio, but for me as an editor, being able to have 3 different audio feeds where you can't hear each other on the feeds because you're in different rooms, definitely helps, because you can be a bit more brutal with the edit. You know, those first couple of episodes, there's a lot of stuff that got cut that you guys will never hear. But, you know, and that was almost easier in a way. But I think almost it was the interaction between us. You almost gave each other more room to speak because you know, we did it in a way where we couldn't even see each other. We did it on a audio only platform called Zencastr, so we could hear each other but we couldn't even see each other. So, you know, we were able to give each other more time to speak, which I think has then let us all settle into our roles a little bit more as well. I think ironically, the one thing that's changed now we've come back into the studio is we're both me and Dan are a bit nicer to Connor, because we can actually see his face and see his instant reaction of sadness when we insult him. So I think in a way, that's almost the thing that's changed the most, that there's more empathy now we're in the studio. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a huge difference between recording remotely and recording in a studio. I mean, if we'd never met, then it might be more tricky. You know, I'm working on a podcast at the moment called An Englishman, an Irishman and a Scot, where, as you'd probably guess, we have an Englishman, an Irishman and a Scot. And the 3 of them have never met. And they probably never will meet, because one lives in London, one lives in Glasgow, and one lives in LA. And they're doing a great job to be able to record that remotely while still at the same time finding out about each other. So for some people that works, that mechanic works. Most people prefer being in the same room. I think me, Dan and Connor, because we've known each other for so long, can get away with it. But I mean, there's so many great platforms out there that make recording remotely workable. Whether it's Zoom, whether it's, you know, just a Google Hangout, whether it's a specific platform designed for that, like a Clean Feed or a Zencastr. There's so many good platforms out there that make it so easy to do remotely that it's almost becoming a non-issue. You know, for some of our podcasts, we are talking about, do we keep them remote? Does it make our lives easier to actually keep some of the recording remote? In truth, probably not. We'll probably keep them coming into studio. We like, as producers, being able to see them. But I don't think there's too much difference between the being in studio and not, if you can still have that rapport. It's the rapport that's the important thing. You know, the reason podcasts work is because you as a listener feel like you can be in that conversation. So it's important, therefore, that the conversation is open and that there is that rapport between everyone, and that it sounds like a conversation that you can just be sat there in a pub with a pint listening to, but you're just not taking part.
Yeah, that's why I think,
as long as you can still get that, then I think you're okay. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. That I think one of the main reasons why a lot of podcasts are popular is the rapport between the guests and stuff like that. So, and I think that's why, you know, why you guys have been so popular, and long may it continue. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, Mike? I know we're just about to wrap up and things like that, but is there anything that you'd like to shout out or give a message to, or just put across, or any advice that you'd like to give the listeners?
I mean, I think if anyone's thinking of doing a podcast, do it. I mean, I know you gave the stat for how many podcasts there are in the world at the minute. It feels like there's 7 per every person. There's so many podcasts out there, but it doesn't mean you can't go and do your own. You know, it's a creative outlet, and I think that's almost the beauty of podcasts. You know, I come from a radio background, and it's nice in podcasts to not have that specific time frame you have to fit into. You know, Baffled each week could be 38 minutes, it could be 43 minutes, it could be, you know, an hour if we decide that it's, you know, compelling enough for an hour. We're not constrained to, it has to be 28 minutes, bang on the dot, and this and that, and you have to cut things down to make it fit and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you're obviously, we can get away with, you know, we make conscious effort to censor it, but you can get away with swearing on podcasts. You can just be you can be a bit more normal. It's not live, so you can cut stuff if you know, make mistakes, or if you say something that you go, oh, I really shouldn't have said that. That's happened a few times. So, you know, it's a podcast give you a freedom that you don't necessarily get with some other media. So if you're thinking about doing a podcast, just do it. It's so easy to create your own podcast now. I mean, obviously there's some brilliant companies out there like Create that I work for that can do it for you. Get the plug in there, plug. Make sure your sound quality is okay. You know, there's a few podcasts I listen to that are huge, but I can't listen to because I just don't like the sound quality. Obviously, I'm an audio guy, and therefore I'm going to notice it more. But, you know, focus on your audio quality, make it at least passable. You know, be creative with things. I was chatting to one of my friends who lives out in Canada, who's just started his own podcast. And the one thing I said to him, I was like, when you do the edit, be brutal. If you're not sure about it, your listener isn't going to like it. Be brutal on that, because you should be the biggest fan of it. You should understand what's going on there. You should be the one that goes, oh, yeah, I quite like what I said there. If you're not sure, get rid of it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're recording for a 30-minute podcast, it's okay if you've recorded 50 minutes and you cut 20 minutes of it. That means you've got the best 30 minutes. So
yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
Don't be afraid of that.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, that's what I wanted to... final question. You know, how much content do you kind of weekly, do you cut down? For how long is the podcast before you kind of, and how hard is it to cut down?
I think it's got less as we've gone on, because we've got more used to everything. You know, to start with, there was probably about 2/3 would make it. There's probably about 1/3 that would get cut, maybe a bit less than that, maybe 3/4 would make it. But yeah, you know, we are brutal on the edit, because, you know, we only want to put out the best content. And there's also, you know, there's sometimes that you're going to make a joke and it's just not going to land, and it's just not quite going to work. But, you know, as we've gone on, we've got used, you know, you fall into those roles a bit more and more. And if we did a live episode now, I wouldn't be afraid of putting out too much content that isn't good. You know, nowadays there's not a lot that necessarily gets cut, because I think it's more of the bits that used to get cut is when you get very used to, you know, building on a joke. And there's a point that you can't build any further and it starts going off a cliff. And to start with, you're not entirely sure where that point is, and you're going to keep going and you're going to fall off the cliff and you're going to cut that sort of stuff out. Now we've got very used to each other. We know what the outs are from jokes. We all kind of know where each other's going with different bits and pieces. And we all know how to play off each other so well that there's probably less stuff that gets cut. But especially in the beginning, we were brutal with it.
Yeah, you know, honestly, Mike, first of all, again, I wanted to say thank you so much for kind of joining us on this podcast, really, and it's given us a real insight in terms of what it was like for you guys to set up, and how not easy, but it's achievable. People can do this, and that they should try. So, you know, for that point of view, just thank you so much for being on there. I hope this kind of is a start of, you know, more chances that we can have a chat together again. And if it gets more successful, we'd love to kind of, you know, keep talking, really. But thank you so much for being on board with us and being part of this series, really.
That's right. I said, thanks for asking me on. I will send you a Baffled badge, so you've got your own Baffled badge. Yeah. Because I know that's what everyone wants. Everyone wants a little bit of Baffled branding. So I'll send the badge across. And anyone who hasn't heard us, just search Baffled in your podcast provider, wherever you're getting this podcast, just search Baffled. And it's called Baffled, Amazing Facts That Are Complete Nonsense. We're out every Tuesday. Every Tuesday we have an episode out, and it is complete nonsense. It is a little bit mad, but you will learn a bit, and you'll also laugh as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark, man. I mean, and this, it kind of goes into the fact that the reason why we set up Colours of COVID and this podcast was to kind of give people a creative outlet during lockdown, and also kind of help people, who are living with mental health conditions, and just feel as though they can do something. And a lot of time when they're locked up or they feel as though they've got nothing to do, stuff like yours and your content is so vital for them to kind of have an outlet to do so. Thank you so much for that, man. Really appreciate it.
That's all right. It's always nice to hear. We get a few messages saying that, the same thing of, I always love it when you wake up on a Tuesday and you realize that you've got a couple, some new followers on Instagram. You've got a couple of messages. You've got some emails. Even people I know will message me and say how happy they are they've got a new episode, and to be able to, to hear it. So, that's really nice for us that we know we're making it for people who care about it. And I think that's the nice thing about the Baffled community, that it does feel like it is a community who care, what we talk about, and people who genuinely care that Connor is okay with his IBS. It's stuff like that that makes it such a nice podcast to work on.
Okay, so we hope you've enjoyed listening to the latest episode of Colours of COVID. Don't forget to share this around. You can find us all on the usual platforms like Spotify, YouTube, and even on our website. All that's left to say is have a wonderful day, stay safe, and we'll see you next time on our podcast. Take care.